Don't broadcast it yet.
Okay.
Okay, and then you'll start video whenever you're ready to get started.
So everyone sees you?
They have to see me.
Huh? Where? Okay.
I am muted. Hold on. Okay, hi everybody. Was that a wow from Donna? That was outstanding and definitely worth the wait. I have to say this is the first time I've introduced a speaker on Zoom, and so it's a new experience for me for sure. I wish I could see everybody, but I'm glad we were able to do this. And so before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to just get started with a couple words. When I was taking a look up for Dr. Costello today, I saw some words that inspired me. She had said, aspire, grow, and succeed. Well, you know, while we're in this new world that we're in quarantine, I know a lot of us are trying new things. We're trying out cooking for the first time, or we're trying out gardening for the first time. And I know for me personally, I'm trying out some new skills with my marketing and sales. I've added to my portfolio to be a marketing professional and a real estate professional. So, you know, I think that we've really heard a lot today that we can do anything we put our mind to. My name is Beth Dittman, and I am the co-owner and publisher of Custom Media Options and Her Mind Magazine. And my company is a marketing and design company. We specialize in niche publishing. Her Mind Magazine, many of you know and can enjoy. Our latest edition is online. You can read our latest blogs and e-newsletter. We, of course, report on women of Howard County and what's happening in our community. So let me, of course, take the honor now to announce and introduce Dr. Bernadette Costello. Dr. Bernadette Costello, let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a coach and a consultant that focuses on partnering with leaders, teams, and organizations in the government and higher education sectors, and are in the midst of our challenging transition, dealing with challenging issues, or want to transform themselves or their organization. Well, we need you, Dr. Costello, more than ever. As a coach, the focus is to help leaders and women leaders get clarity around their personal and professional goals and develop agency to increase their effectiveness and personal power to pursue and reach their objectives. As a consultant, her effort is to assist teams and organizations create alignment between their values and their strategies, provide expertise on leadership development and performance management processes, and develop synergy and strategies to ensure their organizational initiatives stick. Bernadette received a Bachelor of Social Work from Southern Illinois University, a Master in Public Administration from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a doctorate in higher education from George Mason University. Bernadette lives in Northern Virginia with her husband. She loves spending time with her 3 grown daughters, traveling the vineyard, visiting, as I love too. She enjoys running, cooking, and tending to her flower and herb gardens. Please help me in welcoming Bernadette, and I have an honor to introduce her to you today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is just such an honor to be here with the Howard County Chamber doing this women's conference. We were kind of going back and forth whether or not this was going to happen. And I'm just really excited that to be part of this conference and to talk a little bit about how I have helped women in the past really come to share and understand how their values are really embedded in the stories that they tell them, and then how to use those stories to be more effective in being able to use their values to make good, effective decisions. So before we get started, what I'd like to ask you to do, I know you've just gotten up and you've already gotten ready for the day, but I'd like you to just sit in your chair, get really, really relaxed. Close your eyes. Once upon a time. So I want you to think about what your first thoughts were. Think about your initial feelings, your initial things. What might have been that very first story that comes to your mind. I'm going to put up a quick poll. What I'd like to ask you to do is to think about the stories that were read or told to you when you're a child. Do you remember them, even the details? Remember just the highlights? Or I just kind of sort of remember stuff, but not really. Let's see how many people, what people remember. All right. So it looks like it kind of goes back and forth. I only remember the bits and pieces. I remember even the details, kind of almost half and half. And some people remember the highlights, but it looks like no matter what you remember something about those stories. And so when you think about you may not remember all the details. However, you do remember somehow the feeling that was associated with it. So I want to just do another poll. That second poll. So I want you to think about how you felt when you were listening to those stories. When I said, close your eyes once upon a time, did you have the same feeling with the same intensity? I kind of sort of had a general memory of what it was like, or maybe you don't really remember much. Let's see what people think about how they felt. Give people just a few more minutes to think about this. All right, so it looks like people kind of had a general idea of how those stories made you feel. And so when you think about it, although we may not really remember all the details of the specific story, Sometimes we can remember enough of the details that it comes with us. Sometimes we really kind of remember just how we felt. And oftentimes those stories are really about things that we feel really deeply, things that are really important to us, that are really connected to our values. And I have just a really couple of quick videos that I really wanted to share with each of you, just to hear from, whoops, hold on, just a second. You'll have to bear with me here as I share. All right.
Your question is, what is the difference between decision-making using values and values-based decision-making? I would say there's not a lot of difference between the two. I would say there's more of a difference between values-based decision-making and what I call belief-based decision-making. When we make decisions based on our beliefs, it's as if we're using all our past experience and what we've learned to make a decision. It sounds quite attractive. However, we're perpetuating what we believe, which may not be the truth. We're perpetuating ways of making decisions based on the past, not based on what it is that we would like to create. So values-based decision-making allows us to sever the link to the past, if it's appropriate, and then make a decision based on what is it that I want to experience in the future. In other words, what is it that I want to consciously create rather than subconsciously create? Because sometimes a lot of the belief-based decision-making that we use has these fear-based beliefs attached to them in a subconscious way. And so we're actually just perpetuating the old state. So what values-based decision-making allows us to build a gap between the past and the future. So we consciously create the future that we want to have happen. And in fact, what we're actually doing is saying, I want to experience this feeling. When you've got a list of values, what you're saying is, I want to experience this value viscerally by creating the conditions where I can live that value and have the feeling of honesty, have the feeling of integrity, have the feeling, whatever the value that you chose. So that's why it's important, because it allows us to be very adaptable, but to live in harmony with who we are.
Okay. So, new share. So when you think about that video, that values are really important in how we make decisions. And I want to share just one more video with you. If you don't want me to get to it. Okay. This is about personal values.
So what is the alignment between, how important is the alignment between personal values, current culture of the organization, desired culture? The alignment is important because when you have that alignment, it actually releases commitment, enthusiasm, creativity, because you're able to come to the organization each day and you don't have to park your personal values in the car park with your car. You can actually walk into the building and be who you truly are. And when you have to park an aspect of yourself outside of the building, one becomes schizophrenic. And so you come into the organization with a facade, but it's difficult to maintain that facade, because what happens is you get frustrated. You become angry, because guess what? You're misaligned. There's a misalignment between your ego and your soul, who you really are and who you think you're expected to be. And so can you have high performance in that situation? No. You can't have high performance because you're continually regulating yourself to make sure you don't step out of bounds. In other words, fear is kicking in and holding you back from being who you really are. So that's why alignment is important. You want to feel when you walk into the workplace that you can be fully who you are, so you can explore every aspect of your own being and give your gift to the organization.
Okay, so when you think about the things that Robert Barrett just said, that how important it is to have your personal values align with where you live, either within your families, within your organizations, and that those personal values that you have in alignment are absolutely critical when you make decisions out in the real world, whether it be with your significant other, whether it be with your children, whether it be with your colleagues, your peers, your coworkers. That's really, really, really hard to make decisions that are not in alignment. You get stuck, you feel stress, you feel that things just aren't right. So when you think about when your personal values are out of alignment, it's kind of like, you know, when your body is out of alignment, you've got to go to maybe a chiropractor or a physical therapist to help you get back realigned. And so that's really kind of the focus of a lot of the work that I do with women leaders around helping them understand their real values. And this really came home to me when I was coaching a client, and she was really, really stuck. She had a really difficult, a really hard decision to make. And she really was not being able to figure out how to move forward. She was really stuck. I asked her the question, I said to her, tell me a story about a time where you had to make a really difficult decision, maybe something just as hard as this decision was. And how did you figure it out? And so through the whole process of telling me that story, she was able to very clearly identify why she was able to make that decision and what was really important to her. And through that discussion, we really were able to connect why she was able to make that decision and how they were connected to her values. And so when you think about values, it really is about how you, whoops, hold on just a second. I just did something a little bit. I need to share that screen again. I apologize. So when you think about those stories and how they connect with our values, you know, in that conversation that I had with this client, she was incredibly successful in being able to navigate through that story. And so I thought about what is it with stories when she was able to tell that story that she was able to get so much clarity. So I really did some research. And one of the things that I found out was really about our history. History. Think about how long we've been doing stories. It was long before you were told stories when you were growing up. It was long before your grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents were telling stories. It was long before we even had language. Think about the caves where we have drawings. All of those caves, they tell a story. And once we were able to start and develop language, we were able to start telling stories. And so things were passed down from one generation to the next generation through oral tradition. And then we were able to actually get written words, and people started writing these stories down. And so we learn the stories that our parents tell us. And then as we grow and as we develop, we start to figure out we have our own stories to tell about who we are and what we're about. There's also this thing called research. There was a researcher called Peg Newhouse. And one of the things that she did was really researching what is it about telling stories that is so good for people. And one of the things that she found is that when you tell a story, rather than just kind of reciting information, that the stories seem to stick with people. They seem to be able to really be able to remember things for a long period of time. And then there's science that helps us understand what stories do for us. So whenever we are really confronted with a difficult situation, whenever we're confronted with something where we have to make a decision, our body immediately starts producing that stress hormone cortisol. Our heart rate goes up, we might start sweating, we may just start to panic, we're not really sure what to do. And then as we think about our story and as we think about that decision, we're really able to figure out, okay, what do I need to do and how do I need to do it? So then our body starts producing good stress hormones, that oxytocin, the adrenaline, things that are going to help calm us down and be able to be more effective. And then the other piece of stories, no matter what story we tell, it doesn't matter whether it is a story that is told about us, a story that we read, almost all stories have a moment of truth where you have had to make a decision, where you've had to figure out what you need to do, that there has been some critical piece of something you've had to do. There's always been a moment of truth in every story we hear and in every story we tell. And it's in those moments of truth that our stories are actually able to give us some stickiness. And when I say stickiness, I mean it helps us remember. It creates meaning for us. Whenever we have a moment of truth where we've got to decide what to do, what's important to us, what happens is that sticks with us. It lands somewhere in our brain and it helps us remember what was important to us and what we needed to do. And then lastly, it really helps provide resilience. If you can remember what those stories are, if you can remember what those values are, it helps you become more resilient. So in thinking about stories, I want to share a story with you that I shared that I think really kind of helps me define who I am. I belonged to a church that had an investment club. I know some of you may remember many years ago, I'm hoping I'm not dating myself too much, that there were a lot of investment clubs that were happening. And our church decided we were going to do an investment club. I was in on the ground floor with this investment club. And the person who was running it, we put together a charter, we put together a group, and one of the things we decided is that we were going to keep the group small. We were going to have no more than 10 to 13 people. And that as more people wanted to be part of the group, we would just put their name on a list, and we would just, as people left, we would just do first come, first serve. And so we'd had this investment group probably, about 6 months or so. And I remember sitting in a meeting, one of our monthly meetings, and we had a couple of vacancies. And as I'm sitting there, the president of the group sends around some pieces of paper. And I just looked at her and I go, Andrea, what's the paper for? Oh, we're going to vote. And I said, well, what are we going to vote on? And she said, well, we're going to vote on the people who are on the list who we want to be part of the investment club. And as you can imagine, my kind of moment of truth there was, oh my goodness, how can she be doing this? So I said, I'm thinking in my head, I can't believe she's doing this. This isn't really part of what we said we were going to do. How can that be? And I said, Andrea, I thought our charter said that we would do it at first come, first serve. Well, there may be some people on the list that may not be a good fit. And so then I immediately in my head, I'm thinking, this is really out of alignment, not only with my values as a person, it's really out of alignment with my values as part of this church, which is a liberal church, where we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. And so I was sitting there, I just had one of my daughters. So I'm sitting there, I look at her and I think, I have to say something. I can't look at her one day and say, I'd let this happen. So I just raised my hand and I said, Andrea and the rest of the group, this is really out of alignment with what we said we were going to do. And I can't support a selection process like this for new people in our group. It goes against what I personally feel. I feel like it goes against what our faith tells us. And how are we going to tell people what the criteria are? How are we going to tell people that we said that you couldn't be part of this group? And she said, well, we're going to go ahead and vote anyway. And I said, well, that very well may be so, and all of you can choose to do this. I am not going to do this. I am not going to be part of this vote. And when I leave, I'm going to send everyone an email letting them know I am withdrawing from this group. I can't be part of a group that operates outside, so far outside of its alignments. So we're going to get back to that story in just a little bit. I want to take a pause for a minute, and hopefully you have some paper next to you or near you. And so I want you to think about writing down a story that you tell about yourself or that other people tell about you that feels, yeah, I made the right decision. It was hard, it was difficult. I knew it might put me at risk. I knew there was a moment of truth there, but I would make that same decision again, no matter what. So write down some details about this. Write down a little bit about the situation, what was happening, how you responded, how you felt right after you made that decision and acted, and then how you feel right now. So I'll give you just a minute or two to write that down. Oh, you're welcome. All right. So, like with all good stories, there are actual pieces to those stories, right? So, like all stories, there's a who. There are characters who are involved. So in the story I told myself, I was involved. The participants in the investment club were involved. So those are kind of the characters. There are also other characters involved. So my daughter was involved in that. She was kind of a silent character, but she was still part of that. There was also my parents who were characters in that story that nobody heard or saw. But my parents who were telling me in my head, you treat people with respect. You treat people with dignity. That's not how you treat people. Everybody should be treated equally. So those are kind of the characters who were involved in my story. Where the environment, it was just a room in the basement of our church with a whole bunch of chairs around us and around a rectangular chair. So that was kind of the scene. Every good story's got a scene. Every good story has a plot. I've told you a little bit about the plot. We had people who had left the investment club. We needed to have more people come in. And so we were trying to figure out how to do that. And that was the plot, how we were going to do it. And then there was the dilemma. The dilemma is oftentimes that moment of truth that I was talking about. It's where you start to feel discomfort. Whenever you start to feel discomfort, that ought to be a red flag to you that says, all right, I'm headed to misalignment. There is something I'm having to face that is out of alignment with who I am as a person. Okay? So, what was at stake for me? What identity was at stake? So, for me, the identity and what was at stake, the value that was at stake for me was integrity. Am I operating with my value of integrity? Integrity is a huge value for me. Am I acting and doing as I say and as I believe? So that was the value that was at stake for me. And we all have different values. That's why stories are so powerful, because they're personal. They're totally personal. What's a story for me may not be a story for you. But that story has helped me in every time I have felt discomfort or I have felt out of alignment. It has really helped ground me back to being in alignment and acting with my value of integrity. So I want you to think about your story that you wrote down, some of the things that you talked about, that you wrote on your little piece of paper, kind of about the situation, what was going on, how you felt then, how you feel now. And I'm hoping that you have all were able to access this worksheet that was available to you in when you registered and you clicked on this worksheet, this workshop, or this session. And so what I'd like you to do, even if you haven't printed this out, maybe on that sheet of paper, kind of put who was involved in your story. Who were the characters in your story? Where was this at? What was the scene? What was going on? What was happening? What was the dilemma? What was the discomfort you felt? And then think about what is at stake for you. What was at stake for you in that moment? So I'm going to give you just a few minutes to storyboard that out. Who was involved? What was going on? Where were you at? And what was the dilemma? Right, what I'd like to ask you to do is, I know this is going to sound a little quirky. Typically when I'm doing this face-to-face, I have somebody partner up with someone and I ask them to tell their story. And although we can't do that right now because of the environment we're in, all of you are on mute. So it is a perfectly safe way to do this. What I'd like to ask you to do is I'm going to stay on video, and I'd like to ask you to just tell me your story. Even though I can't hear you, I want you to tell me your story. So I'll give you a few minutes to talk me through your storyboard. Who was involved? Where was it at? What was happening? What was the dilemma? And then what was at stake for you? So I'll stay on camera and I'll ask you to share your story with me. All right, as you were telling that story, I know some of you may not have done it because it may have just been a little too weird for you, and I totally get that. What I'd like to ask you to do, if you weren't able to do it today, I'd like to ask you to find somebody you trust, somebody you feel a connection with, somebody you feel who will hold that space for you while you tell them this story. What I have found is just saying it in your head is not as powerful as if you say it out loud to another person. There's something about giving testimony or giving your powerful emotions voice that can be so helpful to helping develop clarity. So if you didn't do that today, I'd like to ask you to find someone to tell this story to. And for those of you who did do it, I'd like you to think about how that felt. Did you feel like there was like a cloud explosion that went off over your head of, oh, that makes sense to me now. Now I know why that was so much of a struggle. I know what was so important to me. I know why I made that decision that I did. I know why it feels good that I made that decision. I would make that same decision today. When you think about the times where you have had a situation where you've had to make a difficult decision and you relive it in your head over and over and over again, and you have a lot of potential regret, or you have a lot of, I wish I could do that over. Think about those times and think about whether or not that decision you made was aligned with what your values are. Sometimes with my coaching clients where they are really stuck in the past, helping them figure out where their alignment got messed up, where they didn't actually act within their values. And that helps them in terms of how to make decisions moving forward. if they're able to identify what those values are, and then how do I make decisions based on that value in the future? Now, sometimes we have to make decisions that are out of alignment with our values. And we oftentimes have to make those for a whole variety of different reasons. What's important is knowing that you are making a conscious choice. To do that helps you understand the reasons behind why you're making that choice, because more than likely, there is a competing value at play. So what I'd like to do is just do another really quick poll. Is, in thinking through that exercise that you've had, when you have a tough decision to make, do you always know what the values are for you? Do you think about the decision, but you really don't connect it to your values? Or I just do it. I just go with my gut and hang and just move on. Wow, this is pretty amazing. Most of you out there are really clear about what it looks like you're really clear about when you may have to make a difficult decision, that you know what your values are and that you know the values and what they're playing out in your decision-making process. Oops. So what I'd like to ask you to do is I'd like to ask you to think about now a really difficult situation that you're facing, a difficult decision that you have to make. And you may not be able to kind of figure out what the decision is now, but I'd like you to think about, who all is involved in this decision. It's not typically when we make decisions, it's not just us. There are a whole lot of other people who are involved in that decision. Who's involved in that decision? Who are the characters? Who are the players? It may even be people that you hadn't even thought of before. What's the scene? Where is it happening? What is happening? What's really kind of the situation? And what's the dilemma? What's the dilemma, or what is at stake for me in this decision? So I'd like you to take just a minute to think about a current decision that you're having to make that you're really struggling with. You're really not sure which direction to go. And think about all of the pieces of that story. Okay. All right. So hopefully, even if you didn't have a situation or a dilemma right now that you're dealing with, hopefully you can pull the strategy out and just kind of make notes. It doesn't even have to be on that storyboard. It can just be on a napkin. It can be on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter where it's at. It's just a real structure for you to be able to help you think through that story. Going back to my story that I told you about in the church, I knew when I made that decision to leave the investment club. Before I left that evening, I just said, I wish all of you well. I want you to know I'm concerned that making this decision is going to create fractions for people who are interested in joining this group. And so I left the meeting. I went home, I did my email. I got my check from the investment club back for all that I had invested. And I was pretty much persona non grata for everyone in that group for a really long time. And I knew that that would happen. They were really angry with me. They were angry that I took a stand. They were angry that I said out loud, this isn't connected with our faith and things that are important to us. And I was willing to take that risk. I was willing to say, this is important enough for me to take this stand. It wasn't until about 2 years later, I was just standing around the coffee area, hanging out, and somebody from the investment club came up to me and they said, Bernadette, I just want to let you know that what you said was going to happen to our club really did happen. There were people who did not get voted in and they were really angry. It created a lot of animosity. It created a lot of anger. And it got so bad that we had to disband the investment club. And that wasn't what I wished for them. It was what I wished for me, to be aligned with who I was. And knowing that I wasn't part of that animosity and that angst, and that I could stand and say, I'm so sorry that happened. So when you think about those decisions that you have to make, even if they're in alignment with your values, they are not going to be easy. They are sometimes going to be very difficult. That it may create an emotional reaction from people who are around you. If you think about what Robert Barrett said at the beginning of this session, that if you aren't acting in alignment with your values, it feels schizophrenic. And it can feel really stressful. And that when you make decisions based on your values, you are thinking in the future, you are thinking prospectively. When you are making decisions out of fear that are not based on values, it keeps you rooted in the past. So it's very retrospective. And just because you've made decisions like that in the past doesn't mean that you can't make decisions that are better aligned with who and what you want to stand for. And that's really the key of making values-based decisions, because you can be resilient and knowing that I'm doing what I need to do to stay aligned for myself and to be able to really be able to take the stress. Because when you make decisions that are value-based, you actually reduce your stress. You aren't anxious. You aren't wanting to have that TiVo moment with that decision where you want to redo it. You are really, really feel good about it and you feel at peace. So thinking about, is this decision I want to feel at peace about? Or am I going to want to relive this decision over and over and over again in my head? And that's what really stories that we have in our head and we have embedded are really important for us to remember, because those stories that we tell about ourselves have our values embedded in them. And sometimes it's just hard to find them because we've not thought about them. And oops, I don't know why that happened. Screen sharing, I don't know why that happened. Let me get back to it. I'm sorry, I apologize. This is Hold on just one second. Let me get back to presenter. All right, so. Yes, I'm going to interrupt here for a question. Yes, a question.
So how do you communicate to others that you can't follow X decision? That doesn't align with your value in a way that you can walk away from positivity.
That's a tough one. I'm guessing that that's probably maybe a work one. I don't know if it's a work one or not. And that's hard because you feel like you are really at odds with other things. So I think what's important is that you start from what the value is. Just saying, I can't do this because it's not aligned with my values. I think tell your story. There was a situation where I was working with a gentleman who had a tendency to really go fly off the handle. And there was one meeting where he basically yelled at me. It wasn't in front of other people, thankfully, but he just, I mean, it totally derailed me. And I sat down and had a conversation with him and I said, you know, Al, I understand you were really upset about what happened. I said, when you went off the handle and you were yelling at me and you said X, Y, Z to me, this is how I felt. It felt I wasn't respected. It felt like that it wasn't what I wasn't important to you. I felt like I wasn't really valued. And those things are really important to me. So I think if you start there and start from your story and start from this is how it disconnects from me, I think that helps it helps create the conversation. And once I said that to Al, he just looked at me and I said, you know, you derailed me for the entire day. I was so out of sorts. And it really took me some time to think about what was going on with me. And it was because of how I felt in that moment. And his response to me was, I am so sorry that it had that impact on you. I did not mean for that to happen. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but hopefully talk from your story, talk from your heart. Our stories and our values aren't really part of our brain, they're part of our heart. So talk from your heart. I use this lighthouse as a way to really show your values are really your lighthouse. The closer you are to that lighthouse, the closer you are to your values, the brighter and the clearer that bright light shines not only on you, but also everything around you. The farther away you get from that lighthouse, the farther away you get from that light, the fuzzier it looks, the lack of clarity is really high. And sometimes those decisions aren't in alignment because you can't see them very well. So I think of values as really your own internal lighthouse that you can really be able to see clearly. Even if you make a decision that is not necessarily specifically aligned with your value, if you make it consciously, you've still got clarity. So I'm hoping that this was helpful to all of you today. If there are specific questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm also on LinkedIn. I would encourage any of you to please connect with me on LinkedIn. And you can send me a message. I'm happy to talk with you about anything that we talked about today. And I just want to thank you for being part of the Embrace session. Just a couple of notes of housekeeping. One, before you leave the session, make sure you download your certificate to get your CEU credits. That's really, really important. And look for the landing page in the link in both the chat and the Q&A so you're able to return to the next session. Lastly, we are scheduled for a break until 11:50. And so that would be a great time for you to go to the exhibitor hall and take a look at the exhibitors and see what they have to offer. And there's going to be a networking segment that's going to start at 11:50. So I wish all of you well in the rest of the conference that you have today. You've got some amazing speakers lined up. So I really wish you well, and good luck to all of you.